Welcome to Ideas of India, where we examine academic ideas that can propel India forward. My name is Shruti Rajagopalan, and I'm a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Today, my guest is Nasreen Munni Kabir, a documentary filmmaker, TV producer and director, author, biographer, translator and subtitler, and an absolute authority on all things Hindi cinema. We spoke about her biographical conversation series of books with artists like Javed Akhtar, Gulzar, Lata Mangeshkar, Wahida Rahman, Zakir Hussain, and A.R. Rahman. We also spoke about her documentary films on Guru Dutt and the television series Movie Mahal, chronicling the history of Hindi cinema. About how she chooses her subjects, the difficulty of subtitling Hindi films, her favorite movies, songs, artists, and much more. For a full transcript of this conversation, including helpful links of all the references mentioned, click the link in the show notes or visit mercatus.org/podcasts. Hi Nasreen, welcome to the show. This is such a pleasure and I have just followed your work for such a long time.
Oh, thank you, Shruti. And it's so nice to meet you as well. Really nice.
I'm so happy to hear that. The latest book that you've written is sort of a follow-up on your past conversations with Javed Akhtar. This is called Talking Live. After reading the work you've done with Javed Akhtar, with Gulzar, so I thought it might be interesting to start with the two poets because I think the contrast might bring out something more than just talking individually about Javed Akhtar. And to me, it seems like the main difference between them is that Javed Akhtar can take a beautiful painting or a visual and explain it very accessibly, very beautifully with a fantastic vocabulary. Whereas Gulzar can take an idea, something that's actually very simple, accessible, ordinary, and then he can paint a visual out of it. Is that a good way to think about the two writers, poets, lyricists, and how they approach things and sort of their mental model?
Yes, I think you've really got it absolutely right because actually Javed Sahab is an intellectual and I think Gulzar Sahab is very intelligent and he's intuitive. I think Javed Sahab actually thinks things through and has the idea first and then later the image comes. Whereas I feel that Gulzar Sahab has the image first. And so that gives a different approach to what you end up seeing and hearing. Now, when you take the songs, you can see that the songs are in Javed Sahab's case, they're much more conversational and the words are very clear, whereas Gulzar Sahab's poetry is unusual and it is referring and creating new imagery. Like, he would make kind of combinations of words that actually you don't expect and sometimes confuse you and you don't quite follow, but they are like bhigi raat. People say bhigi raat, a moist night, and so on and so forth. So the imagery is very different, and I would say that they both speak from their heart, but one goes through their brain and the other through their instinct.
And for me, I thought, I was trying to find comparisons of this. And one that struck me was describing eyes is a big thing in Hindi movie songs. To me, this is not a film song, but it's Afreen Afreen, which Javed Akhtar wrote with Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. There's a big antra in there, which is just talking about aankhein, eyes, And then there is Naina Thag Lenge, which is Gulzar's song with Vishal Bhardwaj for Omkara. And the contrast between the two is just crystal clear because here it's like, oh, I see beautiful eyes and I'm going to describe them 17 different ways. And on the other hand, everyone's been lied to, everyone's been betrayed, everyone, can figure out or not know whether they can trust someone's eyes or looks or face. But the way Gulzar describes it is likhat padat na rasit na khata, which is, there's no paperwork to give me a guarantee that the eyes are not lying to me, which is just such a fantastic thought or a way to think about when do we believe something? Does it have an ISI mark? Does it come with paperwork?
Yes, actually, the thing is that we must also say that they write film songs. And the song that you're talking about is related to the narrative. And it's about characters who are deceptive and deceiving. So he will use that. You can't think of a film song separate from the narrative. I believe Afreen was not in a film. I think it's just an album song. So in a way, you can't compare the two because it isn't connected to narrative. And so what Gulzar Sahab has done within the song is connected to the characters, whereas Afreen is just the exploration of the words and the singing talent of Nusrat Sahab. So they are, in fact, very different songs. But when you talk about the way they use imagery, of course, I think that Gulzar Saab likes to evoke a lot of kind of modern understanding of relationships. He does that even when the other song about his Mera Kuch Saman is a very good example of how it's a very modern concept. And you feel it's not a divorce. It could have been a live-in situation. You don't think it's a divorce. And so therefore he gets into very modern relationships with classical language and unusual vocabulary. And whereas Javed Saab is also very close to the narrative, and one can't really separate film song from narrative. So in a way, that example is a little unfair to both.
No, I didn't mean it as unfair. So let me give you another example with the same, if I stick with the eyes theme, it's Sapno Se Bhare Naina from Luck by Chance, which Javed Akhtar wrote. And in this case, still we can stick with the Omkara song. And once again, that difference becomes quite interesting.
Absolutely, because the Luck by Chance is about people full of dreams who come to a city wanting to fulfill their ambition. So if a song is a good film song, it has to relate to the story. Otherwise, I don't believe it's doing anything. Then it's redundant. And today, if you look at the songs today, they are not very related to the story and they don't know what to do with the song because it is no longer a narrative form. It is in the background. It is an item song. It is something that is actually extraneous to this plot and the story. Whereas the better songs and the film song, the true film song, is like a scene, but in poetry or in verse. So therefore, you have a very different approach to the whole thing.
Another difference between the two is there's a lovely story in your book about how when Javed Akhtar was born, normally you read something from the Quran and sort of, whisper it in the newborn's ear. And in his case, because, his father was a writer, part of the, both the communist movement and the poet and the progressive writers movement and a poet, he apparently, or at least in the book it says he, whispered some verses from the Communist Manifesto. But to me, when I read their poetry, it seems to me that Gulzar is the more revolutionary of the two. And I mean that literally in the sense of revolution and anti-establishment. Of course, Gulzar is also a director. You can see it in his movies like Machis and, so on. But if I take an example of sort of, say, caste revolution, right? I was trying to think of both of them and what kind of songs they've written about, upending the caste order. Gulzar has a song from Ravan. This is taking an older Punjabi verse, Thoko Killi, and, literally march to Delhi, right? That's the idea behind that sort of song. It's a very revolutionary song. And Javed Akhtar's work on caste is sort of, if you read Ye Tara, Wo Tara, Har Taraf, or listen to from Swades, there's one of those antras in there where he's talking about all the different, work that the different castes do. And it's a very Ambedkarite idea again, like, division of labor versus division of laborers. But it's not very revolutionary in that sense, perhaps because the movies are different. But it just seems to me that for both of them in Gulzar's work, I see a much more anti-establishment sort of like underlying theme in what he does.
I would say his vocabulary is very direct, but we cannot divorce it from the story. If that film was in, I don't know, Kuch Hota Hai, it would work because you have to have the story and the character whose vocabulary matches with his person and temperament. If you don't have that, you have lost the audience and the audience don't believe a word of any of it. I think they both can, according to their mood and according to their brief, be very revolutionary. I think Javed Saab, in his way and the way he thinks and his outspoken kind of he's become a cultural commentator in many ways, and he's very clear about his politics. But I would say that really to be honest, in all my work, I feel that you cannot divorce these things because they're part of a whole. They sit with the director, with the screenplay writer, they understand the character, and then they write the song. Whether it is Gulzar Saab or Shailendra or Sahir Saab, if they write songs that are divorced from the situation, no one is going to fall for it. And that is exactly what the problem today is. Today, the song is like a concept of love. It isn't a dialogue of love because the characters are not singing them. They are background songs. It's a very strict format. And if you deviate from them, I don't think it remains a film song. And what you're saying is right. The Thok De Killi was absolutely appropriate for that particular song. I mean, scene and the character. That cannot work anywhere else. And so therefore, you can never judge the vocabulary of a song without its context.
What is to you the difference between them or the similarity between them?
There's not much similarity. I think the difference is what makes them unique and what makes them interesting to audiences. I think, as I said before, the Gulzar Saab's imagery is very new. Like when we were talking with him, he would use the word Chand and Chandni a lot. So he has a lot of obsessive ideas about certain words. And Javed Saab less so. Even though people say he uses some words often, I think it's less obvious with him. And he's very good with similes. He's very good with an understanding of kind of small moments. He's very good with that. And I like his particular song in Kal Ho Na Ho. You know, that's a beautiful song, the title song. And he can be quite philosophical and so on. And so can Gulzar Saab. But I mean, they are also poets. And so one has to, and I don't know their poetry well enough to ask for us to discuss it, but I think the real kind of philosophical and linguistic energy goes in the poetry. So to examine them and compare them, I would not compare them. It's like Sahir has very strong points and so does Shailendra. They cannot be compared. But because they are two poets and lyricists who are the bridge from that generation to now, they are often put in the same pot. It's either Gulzar Saab or Javed Saab, but they're very different. You can't compare, as I say, Majnu Saab and I don't know, Hasrat Jaipuri. These are different kinds of poets. But all of them understand cinema, understand characters. And I think that is their strength. They are writing for characters and taking their emotional point of view, which is not their own. A poet who is writing of his own angst and his own feelings, whereas the film song is not that. They could have certain suggestions of the personal life, but the whole thing is not revolving around that.
Yeah, no, and you said Kal Ho Na Ho, another song about life and death that, again, I've been thinking about the similarity and the difference in the songs, but again, I get your point, it's different films, is Aao Na from Heather. Right? Is also about how fleeting life is and death will surely come. But it's just so different from Kal Ho Na Ho and the temper. And I mean, the broader philosophical point made might be similar, but they're so different.
So different. And also one thing that is the marvelous thing about film song, really, Shruti, is they don't repeat themselves. And you cannot take one song, really. Now you will have songs from the old films playing in the background of the new films, but you cannot use the songs from Bobby in today's films because it will not be accepted. Whereas the stories are repeated again and again. The song cannot. And I think, to me, the Hindi film song is the glue that attaches us to that cinema. It is really very key. It's a key relationship. And because it's going down and there's very few good songs today, frankly, I think the connection is very fickle. You know, an old film, in the old days, you'd say, what's the old film you see? And you would think about, in the 70s, you would think about Pyasa. In the 50s, you think about Saigal Saab. Today, I ask somebody, what was an old film? They'll say Three Idiots.
I know.
So, I mean, really, time has done something. And I think the fact the music isn't so kind of connecting also has played a psychological part to all this.
But one thing I do notice is even if people are not watching the old films, like whenever I visit India on the radio, in all these reality TV shows and Indian Idol and all of these things, people are only singing songs from like, say, 1950 to 1975. They're not exactly singing what happened in the late 70s and the 80s. And then it comes back with Rahman and, Shankar Ehsaan Loy. So there's like a big gap, a 15, 20-year gap where no one's really singing most of those songs. But the songs have somehow managed to sustain. Everyone still knows them. One listens to them. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, the thing is, if you look at the many television programs, you'll find song clips. And on YouTube, they're all there. And you'll see millions. There can be millions of hits for that song.
Yeah.
You take, I don't know, Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se Ajnabi. You'll see millions of hits for these songs. And it is the talent contest actually have to have singers who actually know how to emote within the song words. And in the old songs, you know the words, not only because you know the words by heart, it's because the words express something. And so therefore the poetry in those words is what makes those songs, and the tunes are melodic. Now you will find that the whole structure of the song, the antara and the mukra, the antara may not repeat itself or something. So it's a more difficult song to sing.
No, and that we have to thank Rahman, who's another one of, your subjects of yours for interviews and books. When I read the Rahman book, it somehow felt different from your other books to me. Maybe I'm imagining this, but to me, I could see much more of your hand in it. So I'm not sure if you had to edit it more or pull it together more. But Rahman in his other interviews doesn't seem to give such cogent, such long answers that felt very different. And with all the others, the conversation's more effortless. There's a lot more back and forth. With Rahman, it felt more stilted. Am I imagining this, or is there something, and that book was genuinely different?
I think you're not imagining it. We're talking about that. I don't remember the year the book was done, but Rahman was very shy, reticent. Not shy is the wrong word, reticent to reveal himself. He would often give yes and no answers. And so I had to do a lot of coaxing. And also sometimes I would, without distorting the meaning and the intention, I would have to have joined together two answers to make at least 4 sentences. That was happening. Plus, we did this over Skype over 3 years.
Which is
so
tough.
It was tough, and time zones were different. He was in LA, I was in London. So that all was there. But I think at that time, because everything is of its time, he gave as much as he would give. And today he's much more open. He gives much longer interviews and such. But that was his early days of exposure to the West, to actually talking. He's a very intelligent man, and he's got a fantastic understanding of things and technology and life, and he's a very good-hearted human being, and he has a lot to give as a human being. I would say he's one of the most kind of honorable people in many ways, and in film especially, he has a sense of, he is not really full of himself, he's very down to earth. All that is so wonderful. But at that time, because it was a long time ago, it was just after the Oscars, it was all quite, and book form is not his medium. A book is not the medium of a composer. He expresses himself in music.
Yeah, and that's interesting because at one point he talks about how, he's also largely self-educated. He had to drop out of school fairly early. But he talks about how he's not very good with languages. And I feel like your big disadvantage was that it's not that you didn't know Tamil, it is that his native language is music and you're talking to him in English and he's not very fluent in Hindi, English, Tamil,
English is very fluent.
Anything. I mean in expressing himself, not words.
Because yes, some composers are very good because they analyze music. He doesn't analyze music in that way. Today he does. Today, if you interviewed him, he would. And I don't think it would have made much difference. Maybe it would have made a difference if I knew Tamil. Maybe it would have. But I feel my big disadvantage was not knowing Tamil for the songs, for the lyrics of the songs and those films. That was my big disadvantage. Not that we would have conversed differently, but that was a big disadvantage for me.
I read in one of John Coltrane's biographies that apparently he and Sonny Rollins, one of his contemporaries, would just call each other and start playing music and hang up the phone. And the other would respond in exactly the same way when they had a musically suitable answer. And they had conversations like this with no words spoken and just music. So I feel like one almost has to get something like that out of Rahman. You need to have the musical conversation.
Yes, but now he would talk. Now he would talk. But
okay.
Absolutely, he would talk. But I will say that when I talked to Zakir Saab and when he talked about how he would be on stage, he said all music, and especially classical music and jazz and so on, is a conversation. So you improvise and you answer them and you ask questions. It's a flowing conversation. And I remember Lataji used to say that whenever she and Nurjahan would speak on the phone, they would sing songs to each other because they were favorite songs. And all the operators in Bombay used to listen in because Lataji was singing and Nurjahan was singing. Can you imagine being a kind of fly on the wall in that situation?
I'm getting goosebumps just listening to this story.
Yes, absolutely.
That's extraordinary. Before I get to Lata Mangeshkar, another interesting thing. You just said that Rahman's not full of himself. He's quite different than your typical Bollywood star that one might imagine. And another connection there is Wahida Rahman. Of course, they have the same last name. That's another fun story and we can get into it. But they both seem quite different from the other people that you've described. I mean, they are geographically removed from sort of the Bollywood noise. And they partly that is, chance. In case of Wahida Rahman, it's very intentional. She wanted to stay away from it. What else is it about these two? Is it that they are Tamilian and they're South Indian? Is there something cultural? Is there something in their childhood? What makes them so different from everyone else who has reached that kind of stardom that they are actually not at all bothered by the noise of it and not involved in it at all?
I think it is true is because they were raised in the South, because I think there was much more a sense of tradition, an old tradition, and that when you're in that old tradition, you don't think everything you do is genius. You're a part of a continuous thing. And then Maan came from a very modest background. Wahida ji came from a fairly, an educated background. And she also learned dance. So she knew a different form of performance. And so that makes a difference too. And I think from the very start, in those days, the Muslim actresses would have to change their name and she just refused to. And so she was the first to be called Wahida Rahman. And it is not, as wonderfully appealing as a Madhubala or a Meena Kumari or Nargis or so on. So it showed that she would put her foot down when it came to her identity. But more than that, I think it's also that they are very grounded in family life. That is very true. And so therefore, when you have a strong family, I really don't mean to say that others don't have a family life. They do. They all do. But it was the quieter life in many ways. And more for Rahman, he's very, without trying to ever convert anyone or do anything, but he has a spiritual life. And I think that makes a big difference. You think of things as being transitory, that you are very famous today, tomorrow your song may not work. And you have to be able to take both. If you can't take both, you're in big trouble.
Yeah. And, the lovely thing is not only do Rahman and Wahida Rahman have the same name, the spelling's slightly different, but Wahida Rahman is very adamant. She just refuses to drop her last name or change it. And Rahman actually adopts the name Rahman because his name at birth that was given to him is completely different. Dilip Kumar. And he says, no offense to Dilip Kumar, but I never really liked the name. And he chooses Allah Rakha, which is also, Zakir Husain's father, Abbaji's name. So, but there's something going on with the names of all these people. Like Guru Dutt is not really Guru Dutt. That's his first name. No one knows the rest of his names.
Yes, they don't know it's Padukone.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. And Gulzar, I don't think anyone knows Gulzar as Sampurna Singh Kalra. Javed Akhtar apparently got the name from his pet name, which is Jadoo. So what's going on with is this just from that time? Like people would just kind of pretty chill about names and changing names. And now it feels like there's this passport and Aadhaar and the name is your name. That's it. It's all of your identity. But there seems to be something very fluid about the names of all these people. Are they unique or is it just a function of that time?
I think it's a very nice thing you brought up, and I've never thought about it before. But honestly, in a way, the world of cinema is fiction. And therefore, when you say everybody knew that Dilip Kumar, all his family and his close friends called him Yusuf Saab. They didn't call him Dilip Kumar. So there was a split between the screen identity and who the person was. And so the name was like that. And many of them were it was quite natural that there was this split. I don't know if it is not so unique to just Indian cinema, because in Hollywood, I don't know what Kirk Douglas's real name was something completely different. And quite a few of the people who are Russian immigrants into America changed their name to make it easier. Rock Hudson's name, I don't think is Rock Hudson, his original name. I don't remember what it was, but I mean, it's because they entered screen. And of course, when a writer changes his name to a pen name, that's a whole different ballgame. And you have the same thing happening in many kinds of in art forms. I don't know about painters usually keep their name, but in film and also in writers, you will find, George Sands is, you know what I mean? So it was kind of common practice.
Yeah. Another thing that I found, maybe I'm trying to find too many unifying threads, but I read all the books together very recently, again, to prep for the conversation. So all this is popping up. Most of them had quite difficult childhoods and had to become sort of responsible for earning for their family, or at least look after themselves, because their family couldn't look after themselves very early. In the case of Waida Rahman, A.R. Rahman, Lataji, it starts in their teens. Zakir Hussain also starts playing and earning in his teens, but, maybe not in such dire circumstances. Zar in his late teens, Guru Dutt, they all start working very early, even by the standards of those days. Is that something that makes them all really unique? Because, you've picked these people. You've obviously picked them because they're different from,
I'll tell you later why I picked them. I'll tell you why.
I would want to know. But
this later?
Okay, perfect. So is this one of those... Is this something that, I'm not saying you go looking for it, but did this pop out when you were researching them, when you were speaking with them?
Yes. I think when you have to earn for your family at a very young age, which you mentioned all their names, and they did have to, you become a very responsible person. You become someone who is extremely responsible, hardworking, very hardworking. And you know that the only thing you have to do is to protect and to earn and to protect your family, to earn and to work. So they have a really strong work ethic. So you would have a situation with Lataji never used to think twice of going in the morning to one studio and taking the train, not eating sometimes, not knowing if there was a canteen in the studio, going to the next, because it was her work ethic. It's not just because she needed to earn money. It's the way they made work their life. And I think in later years when Wahida ji was settled and she became much more involved with her family. But I'm sure as a young person, she was also responsible. Even Yusuf Saab, Dilip Kumar, he was looking after his family. And so each one you'll find who were looking after their family became very responsible and obsessive by work. And that is a pattern you see. And they knew the value of money. They knew the value of how important it was to make it in some form, in some way, and not necessarily egoistically, full of themselves, but in terms of actually having enough so that they would have enough, because all around you, when you see very poor people, they must be quite a terror of also falling down and not moving up. So it's in front of you all the time. You walk down the street and you see it.
What I found interesting about them is despite having this sort of situation where you have to have this fantastic work ethic, be professional, you're basically doing this for a living, not as just a passion or something, even if it might be one. They all dare to be different, which is quite difficult in these circumstances, right? Normally, one would imagine, I won't say sell out, but it's quite easy to say circumstances are difficult, we need to do this for the money and get on with it. But they all have said no to some phenomenal opportunities in their lives. You've documented those instances well. They've all been, maybe except Lata Mangeshkar, they've been big points in their life where they didn't have much work, or they had to take a sabbatical, or they just couldn't do what they were doing because it wasn't fulfilling them in some way, or their talent wasn't being used well. So I find that quite interesting, that one would expect them to be very cookie cutter, do what the mainstream says, and they still manage to somehow be quite far removed, from that kind of attitude.
But actually, what happened is that once they started working, the money security and the financial security got established, and then choices. And like, for example, Vahidaji talks about in the book, she talks about how she refused to wear certain type of clothes and had an argument with Raj Khosla and basically refused to work with him for quite a number of years. And so there were people who also had very strong family backgrounds. And so therefore they also knew the values they carried forward. And so even if it meant saying no to one film, another film was going to come. She was Wahida Rehman. And so that wasn't an issue. But what she stood for was an issue. Oh, Lataji would say, look, I'll sing any number of songs, but no vulgar songs. And so that is her point of view and her sense of aesthetics and morality.
With Wahida Rehman, that to me is my favorite of all the books, probably because we know so little about her. She's not really there in the conversation. She doesn't give too many interviews. So one, I learned the most about her as a person, but also just so refreshing in her candor. I mean, if I were to use a modern language, I would say she has no F's to give. She just says what she means. She's not rude or nasty, but just really just speaks her mind. And from the stories that are there in the book, it seems like she's been doing that since she was 16, and she was doing that in front of everyone. She was giving, ideas about edits, about removing songs from films. And she was just very honest and candid about what she thought. And that's one unique for a woman of her time in the film business. I just found her to be so extraordinary and refreshing.
And I must say, she was surprisingly aware of the technique of film. She knew about cameras, she knew about lenses. Photography is very important to her. She's a good photographer.
Yeah.
And she was very aware of what was happening on the set in terms of the technique. I don't think many of the actresses were that aware of or asked questions about cameras and lenses and so on. She had a very kind of a healthy relationship with other film people and healthy relationship with the technique of cinema. And I think that also, I think she had her gurus when she was learning how to dance. And so she understood that you don't just dance, you understand dance. And so you don't just work in cinema, you understand the forms and the language of cinema. And so you can see the discipline of the dance practice and ethics coming to her work. And that is also, she brings something else to it, another layer.
I thought it might also be that in the very early years, her cinematographer was V.K. Murthy, who is a fellow Tamilian and apparently one of the few people she could just sort of chat with. And I'll tell you a V.K. Murthy story after this. But it also seems like, I mean, there's also so many, instances of luck or just chance in these things, right? You find a Tamilian cinematographer, he happens to be one of the greatest that ever existed in that time or ever. And you have all these conversations with him because you are shy, you're young, you don't really know anyone else on the set. And he's sort of looking out for you. So it's quite lovely.
Yes. And don't forget, it's Guru Dutt.
Yes, it's Guru Dutt.
Now, Guru Dutt found Murthy. Yeah. Wasn't the other way around.
Yes.
So I would say first is the director. He is the captain of the ship. And Guru Dutt was an impressive filmmaker, was a very impressive filmmaker. So if you start your career with him, like Madhuri and like Sharmila Tagore, starting with Mr. Ray, when you start with a master, how can you not be made alert of what's happening around you? It's not possible. It's really not possible. And I would say Guru Dutt was such an amazing artist, and Murthy was at his service. When you have a good director, everybody involved wants to please that one man or that one woman. And same thing with Mr. Ray. Look at his team. Look at Guru Dutt's team, Raj Kapoor's, Mehboob Khan's. They worked with the same people who they fed off each other's artistry. And so all the actors who had any intelligence also did that. And if you take like Dilip Kumar, if you look at for me, his best performance is in Andaz, and he's working with Mehboob Khan. And here's a man who is not educated at all, Mehboob, and yet he makes those amazingly modern films, an amazing understanding of melodrama, fantastically cinematic. I mean, when you work with people like that, you have to raise the bar yourself as a human being. And all the people who have worked, even with Bimal Roy, Raj Kapoor, Gurudutt, Mehboob, they have all very interesting. They are the leading minds of the Hindi cinema of that period. Today we have other leading minds too. It's not that they just stopped existing, but I mean, you have to have an environment in which you are encouraged. Cinema is a team job. It's teamwork. And if you don't have everybody working with you, I mean, think of the songs Sahir gave Pyasa. Without Pyasa, Pyasa would not be Pyasa. Without Sahir, Kagaz Ki Phool would not be that film without Murthy. So Murthy said something wonderful about Gurudutt. He said he really had a jeweler's eye and he knew how to pick the diamonds. And the director knows how to pick the diamonds. And whether it's actors or technicians, because you're in the hands of technicians. They are your eyes.
Other than, say, the musical side of the technicians, most of the other technicians who worked with Gurudutt actually did their best work with him. They never managed to quite replicate that level with the others that
mostly
they worked
only
with.
Gurudutt. I mean, only Murthy. But Majru Saab was fine, Sahir was fine.
Yeah, exactly. The musical,
was fine.
The musical
Yes.
side is pretty good.
And acting. Devanand was good also. In his own way.
I still somehow feel their best work was with Gurudutt.
Because the film is the best.
Yeah.
It's not their best work, it's the film. The film is good. I mean, if you take, I don't know, Godfather. My God, all of them are excellent, but that film made it gel. It's, that's true of Hollywood.
I have a question about Gurudutt and Wahida Rahman, very specifically on dancing. So I learned from your documentary that Gurudutt actually started his life learning choreography and was training to be a choreographer. I think there were some circumstances he was thrown out or he left the
No, he
school.
wasn't thrown out, but he wanted to be a director.
Yeah. And Wahida Rahman was a fantastic dancer. That's actually how she got introduced to film. But I don't think she has any big dance sequences in any of her Gurudutt movies, and he never choreographed her. Why is that? That's such a bizarre thing.
Because there was no real space for a dance number per se in Gurudutt's films. Where would you have put it? You had Madhubala and Mr. and Mrs. 55. She just kind of walks in and does something, but there's no real dance. I don't think where his dance and his choreography can be seen totally evidently is in his camera movements, in his trolley shots, in his tracking shots. These are where you see choreography. And the way he choreographed a song between wide and close-up and long shots, that's choreography. So he used choreography in the language of cinema rather than the literal language of having a dance. And the only one place that they could have had a dance would have been in Kagaz Ke Phool. When Wahida Rahman is an actress, there could have been a scene where she dances. Otherwise, in Pyasa, if she was dancing in a kotha, she would have been a very different character. It would not have been the same Gulab. So he knew that it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate.
And the dream sequences are also not the dancing dream sequences for him.
And it is a modern waltz. It's not an Indian dance. It is a dream in the Hollywood sense, that stairway to heaven kind of thing, and the smoke and all of that. It's very Hollywood understanding of a dream.
Yeah. Waqt ne kya haseen sitam, that entire, the way that song is shot and choreographed, it's like nothing I've ever seen before or since, actually. That song just stands.
It's a dance. It
is a dance, right? Of light and shadow.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that the choreography was in his camera movements.
Yeah, that story is also lovely, how they managed to get that beam of light.
Murthy,
Murthy is just, it's amazing to read that after having watched the movies, and a lot of it I may not have even paid attention to. The other thing that struck me about, not that I'm surprised that both Wahida Rahman and Lata Mangeshkar understand the technical process of filmmaking, of sound recording, the equipment, they seem to know that really well. The reason I was surprised is that both of them are self-educated, right? They started working so early, and even their education is not exactly in this area. They never got to go to a film school or a traditional music school and have like these other people where you meet, if you go to Berklee School of Music, you'll meet people who are on the technical side, you'll meet sound engineers. They sort of learnt on the job, but there's something about these two women. They are just so sharp and observant to what's happening around them. And that doesn't surprise me because they're women. It just surprises me because they basically had no formal education.
You see, I don't think education has anything to do with filmmaking because it is really about it's a visual art, and it's a combination of the 7 arts. And it's music helping you, performance helping you, storytelling helping you, all of that helping you. Where it comes into play is that because Vahida ji was a dancer first, she knew the facial expressions. She herself talked about the fact she thought her voice was very weak, but her eyes and her expression, because of dance training, was very strong. Whereas Lataji could grasp the tune and grasp the song, and at the same time, she would ask the composer or the director or whoever was she dealing with, who am I singing for? So the tonality would match Nargis or Meena Kumari or Sarah Banu or even Dimple in Bobby. So for generations, she understood the kind of character that she was singing for. Girlish, womanly, and so on. If you see a song like Ajeeb Dastan Hai Ye, now that is for a mature woman. And you can hear her tone, and you can hear the songs in Bobby. So you could see that she understood the age group and the kind of actress she was singing for. And that has nothing to do with education. It's understanding the form.
But it is different from their contemporaries, right? Not everyone was able to understand that this is either necessary or even if they knew this is required, they perhaps didn't have the talent or the means or the facility to achieve it. There is something quite unique about both of them.
But I would say we could be a little wrong, whereas Nargis had it, Meena Kumari had it, Rafi Saab had it, Kishore Kumar had it. There were a lot of very talented people were around, a lot of them. They all knew it. I don't think Rafi Saab went to a university or something. But I mean, you hear Chaudhry Ka Chand, or you hear the other song in that one lovely song, Suhani Raat Dhal Chuki. My God, I'd give him a PhD in 1 second. But what use of it is it to him to have a PhD when he can sing like Suhani Raat?
No, but what I mean is Mukesh sounds like Mukesh. Very distinctive in every song.
He didn't have classical training. Well, Rafi Saab did and Lataji did. So the classical training is the education, not the going to Berklee. That was in his own tradition. They were totally educated.
Yeah. So let me ask the question you raised first, which is what made you pick all of them? What unites them other than the fact that they have worked with you?
Yes, I think it was a little bit of arrogance on my part, but I thought each one of them must have 5 films minimum that are classics. Then I would choose them. Wahida Rahman had obviously Pyasa. She had Sahibi Ghulam, she had Guide, Tisri Kasam, which is a wonderful film, Tisri Kasam. And she had also Pyasa, of course, and Kagaz Ke Phool, and other films. So 5 films, definitely. Lataji has 5,000 of them. So there was, and Rahman does, Gulzar Saab does, and our dear Javed Saab has. I mean, who could have write Kitne Aadmi The? I mean,
but that seems to be the necessary condition. It's not the sufficient condition. There might be more than just this group that has at least 5
they had to be articulate.
Films. Okay.
They had to be articulate because they had to understand their own work and their own life. And they're very bright. All of them are very bright. But to me, the first thing is, can I have a retrospective and show 5 films of theirs? Otherwise, you are kind of celebrating the premiere before the film is released. You have to have the work first. Yeah. The work has to matter. And then people will want to know about these people. If they're just famous, it's not enough. And when it came to documentaries, I did a documentary on Amitabh, who's also absolutely among history makers, and Shah Rukh also are history makers. They're history makers. And as Javed Saab put it once, is that when these people entered their field, they changed it. After Lataji came in, singing had been molded by Lataji's example. And same with Wahida ji, acting, Rahman 100%, and so on. They change things. They're not just coming there for the job. They've changed what it means to be a playback singer. So that is also must be part of the choice.
Here, I think Zakir Hussain seems a little bit different, not just because he's not mainly a film personality, but, I wouldn't say that he completely changed things. To me, what he did is...
I think he did.
Okay, to me, it seems like he just took it to another level. Like he surpassed every metric and every expectation that might have been set for someone like him who came from this classical tradition.
But where he changed things is he worked with jazz musicians. He worked with all kinds of musicians, which the other traditional tabla players were not doing. Plus, he has established, people go to his concert just for the tabla. This is new. They would not go just for Rakha. They would go because Pandit Ravi Shankar was there. So he changed it. And he is 100% history maker.
No, history maker for sure.
For sure. And nobody used to go to only a solo tabla. I don't remember it, even in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But Zakir, I went to a concert of his at NCPA on Sunday. He was the star that brought the audience. Even though there was Sabir Khan, who was on the Sarangi, beautiful, and a flute player was a woman, wonderful. He's the man. He's the man. Of course, he also had the capacity and the ability to play with all the greats. Imagine how many great ustads he's played with. There isn't one he hasn't. There isn't one. I mean, what a privilege. What a privilege.
To me, the fact that he played with so many different musicians somehow, to me, it doesn't seem that different because, for instance, Ala Rakha recorded with Buddy Rich, when they have this lovely record of, Rich Ala Rakha. And that seems to be the forte of a tabla player. I mean, Abbaji before him had composed for film. He had played with dancers. He had played with, jazz musicians. He had played with foreign troops. So to me, that seems more like a continuation than anything else.
It's a continuation.
But I do agree with you on the soloist.
And more so. Yeah, the soloist is definitely Zakir. And maybe Allah Rakha, they would have also done that finally, but it didn't happen. But I don't know whether he had played with Bismillah Khan Sahab, Allah Rakha. I don't know. But Zakir has. I don't know whether he's played with some of the others. Birju Maharaj, did he play with him? I don't know. So I think he was mostly connected with Pandit Ravi Shankar, really. And I'm not even sure whether he played with some. Did he? I'm not sure.
I think he might have, actually. I can go and look up my old Vilayat Khan records. But yes. I think he might have, actually.
Okay. But I would say that they are both geniuses.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And one shouldn't, it's unfair to compare one or the other.
No, I didn't mean as an unfair thing. Yeah. I meant more in terms of, everyone else does something quite, even if, your father is a poet or in Rahman's case, his father was a musician and, so on. And even actually did music for a film. They seem to be quite different from the sort of expected path that was laid out for them. And I feel like in some sense, Zakir Hussain has done something even harder. The expected path that was laid out for him was actually a pretty high bar to start with. And he managed to do all of that and also surpass it, not necessarily by being different from what was expected, but just by being extraordinary.
I agree. But I think also it's a very, very hard thing to be the son of someone famous.
The thing that unites all of these people, like you said, I mean, they have to be extraordinary. They have to be articulate. In your experience, is that difficult among film personalities or even more generally artists, that they're not able to articulate what they do very easily or well?
I think they have to trust you, number one. And I think you have to actually study their work and come up with questions that will surprise them and that they will think about their work differently because you've surprised them with the question. I think they're all very articulate. Some may be drifting into Hindustani and out into English. Like Lataji was all in Hindustani, and Javed Sahab drifts in and out. So does Gulzar Sahab. So does Wahida Ji. So you have to be bilingual. But most important is you gain their trust. They know why you are there. Why are you interviewing them? They have to know that. And it really helps enormously if they know your work. And before I started doing these books, Shruti, I used to make documentaries. I made lots and lots of documentaries. And I did a 3-hour documentary on Lata Ji. So she knew me. And Wahida Ji I did because of
Through the Guru Dutt documentary. Yeah.
So I knew many of these people. Rahman, I did a documentary on the making of Bombay Dreams with Andrew Lloyd Webber. So Rahman was there. And Gulzar Sahab, I've interviewed him on film many times. So they knew my work. They've seen it. I always made a point to give them a copy of the documentary. And they all saw, especially the Guru Dutt documentary, they all saw it. And after seeing the Guru Dutt documentary, thanks to a wonderful friend called Sajeev Kohli, who is Madan Mohan's son.
Yeah.
He recommended me to Lataji, and she saw the Guru Dutt, and that's how she said yes. So one job led to the other, and that is how it basically happened. And now the books are another kind of ball game. It's another world. I'd say the Movie Mahal series and the documentaries are less visible today to a lot of people in India, so they know me mainly by the books. And I've been doing, as I think you know, lots of subtitling. So I've had a lot of dealings with the younger generation of filmmakers.
Yeah, I want to get to all of those parts of your work, but I want to first start with documentaries, and I want to start with Guru Dutt. So why a Guru Dutt documentary? Was it to reintroduce that to the next generation? Because by the time you made it, he had already, been gone for many decades. And
was 22 years.
Yeah, was it that stuff will be forgotten, or just a different kind of fascination, or it had a market internationally?
I was obsessed by, and I still am, by Guru Dutt's films.
Why?
And so, why? Because I think he understood how to make the Hindi film idiom work perfectly. He understood how to do it. And that is rare. Really, it's rare. And so therefore I was very interested in him as a filmmaker. And he has such a nostalgic face and so full of melancholy. So you kind of fall in love with this kind of character. Plus, I think that if you want to keep someone's work who you love and are passionate about alive, you champion their work. And I was fortunate enough, thanks to Farooq Dhonde, who was working at that time at Channel 4, and he commissioned me to make these documentaries. And so it was only a natural choice. And I remember I had spent, I'd seen 36 people who had worked with Guru Dutt. And then out of that, I chose the people who would be on film. And because of that, I met a lot of people. And later I gave the tape. And I remember 2 comments which really moved me. One was Raj Khosla. And he said, how did you get Guru Dutt to act for you? Because all those clips look like he's acting for this documentary. And the other person who said something totally beautiful in his own style, it was Majru Sultanpuri. He said, "Isme to halki si kahani aa gayi." And that was a big compliment because it became like the story of Guru Dutt. And everybody, Mufti Saab, his Guru Dutt's mother,
Abrar
Alvi, they were all wonderful. But when you go to Abrar Alvi, you don't go researching on camera. I knew exactly what I wanted to ask him. I wanted to ask him about one scene in Mr. Mrs. 55, another scene in Saibubi. It took him back. Don't forget another thing. It was 22 years after he died. Now it's how many more years? And so memory was much fresher then. And a lot of things were fresher in terms of the 50s in the 80s than they are today. Today, the 50s is 70 years ago.
Most of the people he worked with are
They've all gone. In that, Wahida Ji is the only one, I believe, who's around. Munni Kaul's gone. He was in the film. And Johnny Walker, all of them. Majru Saab, Kafi Saab, all of them. Wahida Ji is the only one.
Ah, wow. So It's been a while. We forget how long it's been since those movies.
Yes.
The other question I had about documentary, and I'm glad you mentioned that Majru Saab said that Isme to kahani aa gayi. One, is that something you're looking for consciously? I mean, I know you're trying to tell a coherent narrative, but are you trying to string it together as a poetic sort of story, which is what I felt when I saw the Guru Dutt documentary? It gives you a very nice peek into his life, but it's almost like one of his songs.
You have to make it, for one, a film, and for two, you have to tell a story. Otherwise, it's very dry. It becomes
Does
very
it worry
dry.
you that when you're in the documentary style of filmmaking, some fiction might peek into it or something else might sort of slip into it? Is that a concern? Because you're very careful about that in the books and the conversations, that it has to be the voice of the person that, you are conversing with. And you sort of emphasize that in each introduction. Do you worry about that in the documentary filmmaking side at all?
Not really, because the documentary, if you're showing a clip from Pyasa or Mr. and Mrs. 55, film is interpreted by everybody who's watching. So you may think it is fictionalized or not authentic, or whatever you think is absolutely right. But the film clips allowed me to weave a story. And because Guru Dutt was the actor, he came alive. I cannot make the same film about Mehboob or about Bimal Roy because they were not in their films. I could make the same type of film about Raj Kapoor. It is what Raj Khosla said. How did you get him to act for you? And that's a very perceptive comment because it meant that the clips did the talking as if Guru Dutt was there. So you really felt Guru Dutt's presence. And that was very willful. And if it wasn't willful, I should get another job.
No, the unfortunate thing is I've seen it in a horrible YouTube print, and I can just imagine what it would be like on the good print because I couldn't find it streaming or otherwise anywhere.
I should send it to you.
Oh, that would be a treat. The other question I have is sort of, I know that some of this was commissioned by Channel 4. You met certain people who had this common interest. But you're also unique in that you figured out that there is a global interest in Hindi cinema. And this is before the NRI films of, Aditya Chopra and Karan Johar and sort of this big, now Indian, there's a large enough and rich enough Indian diaspora that they watch these films and they'll watch a retrospective. But that wasn't the case when you made these documentaries or when you started on this journey. It's there in one of your books. Javed Akhtar said this, I think, that if there isn't a market for your work, you have to create a market for it. Was that what you were trying to do? Or did you just know that there will be a demand and an audience for it? Someone just has to have the eye and just put it out there. Because you're very early, on this journey. Sort of a first mover.
To be very honest, I never thought about all that. I just did it. And I really felt that Hindi cinema was not given the respect it is due. And I felt the masters really would be wonderful. But it was also, I learned and discovered things for myself. It was my connection to India. So it was something that you wanted to learn more about and discover more about. And really that was it. I honestly didn't think about a market. I was very fortunate that Channel 4 and Farid Bondi and Sue Woodford before him, they understood that for the Asian community living in UK, they would love these programs. So they commissioned them. But I was quite surprised with the reaction. We got thousands of letters. Shruti, we got thousands of letters from fans in the UK saying Movie Mahal. The videotapes in the old days of VHS were circulating all of Africa. I remember meeting people from Kenya and they said, oh, we've seen Movie Mahal and so on. I didn't realize what it could do. And I'm very happy it happened then. It happened then.
So you were basically making it for yourself. Like you thought I would want to see something like this living in London and loving Hindi cinema.
I was making it to discover who are these people who make films. Because a documentary should be a line of inquiry, not just for the self. Then you can just make selfies and sit at home and watch them. It is to discover the work of some others and to understand their skills.
Did you have a plan? Like, okay, I'll do this and then I'll move on to some... did you think of yourself primarily as a documentary filmmaker that I will move on to another subject, maybe a politician, maybe a musician, maybe, I don't know, Elton John or something else? Or was it that you think of yourself primarily as a film writer and a film journalist with a keen eye for Hindi cinema? Like how did you view yourself even at that age?
I had met P.K. Nair, who was the first founding director of the National Film Archives. And I think what interested me was not so much making documentaries about people, but about archiving and chronicling a history of a cinema. And for me, I think my work has been really chronicling film practitioners. And so I just been doing the same thing forever, but it's going deeper and wider in as much as getting different people talking about their work. And the books were an extension of that, because the documentaries, the interviews, because obviously you cut for a documentary and you make it shorter, the interviews are very long. And a company called Adam Matthews actually have these educational packages which they sell to different universities in America and Canada and so on. And they are going to be promoting this Indian cinema package. And you see the interviews, they're very long. They're not a program. And to be honest, the primary inspiration, my guru was Mr. Nair, and he taught me how it's important to chronicle and archive the practitioners, and he was archiving and really collecting films and keeping the negatives and so on. So primarily it was about archiving and chronicling.
Now you're doing sort of like an archiving, but in real time with subtitling. First of all, may I just say, as a consumer of, these films, I'm so grateful that we have better subtitles and we have you to thank for it. Because I'll watch some of these movies and they will have English subtitle, and in some serious scenes, I've just laughed out loud while watching these movies because subtitling is horrible. And so first, how did you get into it? I'm not surprised they asked you, but what is it about the process that interested you? And what are the movies you've done? What do you enjoy about it and so on?
I think some of the subtitling is very funny, and there's a website which is run by an American called Pagal Subtitle. You must see it. She takes screen grabs from Hindi films, and there's a whole lot of them. They are outrageous. They ruin the film, and as you say, all you do is laugh. Basically, while I was doing the films,
I don't know if I found it in your thing or a meme that was floating around, but the Amir Khan film, The Rising, it had Mangal. And it said Tuesday,
so it
Tuesday.
Yes.
No, I know it wasn't you, but I don't know if you brought it up in some forum or
yes.
I saw it in a meme. It said Mangal, 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 Mangal is the beginning, the chant in the beginning of the song by Kailash Kher. And it says Tuesday, 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 Tuesday. And I thought, thank God it doesn't say Mars, 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 because that's the other way you could think about this.
Yes, really, honestly. And I mean, obviously, it ruined the scene, ruined the song.
I just laughed out loud.
Yes,
it's horrible.
Really, it's horrible. But basically, when I was doing the documentaries, the 80s, I did big festivals of Indian cinema at Pompidou Center, 100 films, 120 films, and so on. And Channel 4 started. And besides the documentaries, they gave me a contract, which I still am doing, is curating the Indian films on Channel 4. And so therefore I started subtitling in the 80s, because the films would go on to Channel 4 and I would do the subtitles and work with the team for the technical stuff and also learning the process. And so one of the early films we did was Sholay, and then it kept going. So now since the 80s, and then in recent years, the Indian producers have asked me to do their films because they knew about the Channel 4 films and various. And so the films, I mean, I did lots, 800 films, a lot of films and a lot of classics. But recently, Shruti, the film I've been getting the most praise for was Rocky Aur Rani Ki Prem Kahani.
The subtitling was fantastic in that, by the way. I am so thrilled. I didn't know you did it, but I actually watched it in the movie theater, and very nicely done.
I've got the most praise, including on Twitter and God knows what, about Rocky Aur Rani. And that was amazing. And I enjoy it because it's a challenge. It's very much about cinema. So you have to translate in 2 seconds, 3 seconds and make it work. You have to keep the vocabulary, if possible, in terms of the character and so on and so forth. So it's a very challenging thing. And subtitles has now united the cultural world. I mean, the world. I mean, think in India, Shruti, how popular the Korean dramas are.
Or
how would they manage?
India, Malayalam cinema, Telugu cinema, we're just watching all this using subtitles, right? I don't speak those languages.
That's right. But more important is, how is everybody watching Korean?
Yeah, Iranian, Korean, it's amazing.
Amazing. These costume dramas are Korean, they are big in India. They're big. And it's subtitles. So subtitles have been starting to be taken very seriously, and Indian films had to follow.
So, how do you think about your audience? So, for instance, I've noticed that you don't do a word for word translation. You know, Javed Akhtar said this. He said in Hati Mere Saathi, there was a bit where it said, Wo hati mere piche haath dhoke pada hai, which would roughly translate to that elephant is doggedly chasing me or stalking me,
yes,
right?
Yes, and instead of it's chasing me, but it's, yes.
I think he said, this elephant is chasing me after washing its hands or something.
Yes.
Hands.
Something ridiculous.
Something ridiculous. So I know you don't do a sort of word for word. You're not literal at all. So I know that. I know the other challenge must be to get it to fit in that frame, even if it's not all of the dialogue.
To try and keep the character.
Yeah, to keep the character.
I'll give you an example.
Who's the audience? Yes, please.
Our audience is international. It's everybody non-Hindi speaking, and also
but for instance,
third generation.
Would you do like a namaste or a chai?
Yes,
or
I'd leave it as namaste.
Exactly.
So everybody knows chai.
Every word. Okay.
No, and everybody knows namaste. Everybody knows salam. I mean, really. And everybody knows roti, lassi, biryani. I mean, who has translated pizza? Nobody. Risotto. Nobody. And so why should we translate lassi?
What are some of the words you struggle with where you feel like, if I translate this, it's going to be more appealing beyond the diaspora, but if I just transliterate it, it might be only the diaspora?
I don't do that. But the technically difficult word is aukat and jugaad.
Oh, yeah.
I'd say those kind of words, or some poetry. One song, Chalo Ek Baar Phir Se, is a very difficult song to translate, because the way it's not only structured, but the suggestiveness in words within the word, and you have a restriction of time. Subtitles should be almost invisible. If they're good, you don't notice them. And they should just let you get into the film. So you have to be clear. You don't go away from the meaning of this thing, but you don't become literal, because you don't have the time to be literal. If you did word by word, you'd be sitting there. And for example, I was working on Ponniyin Selvan. Now, I don't speak Tamil, but I work with two translators, and then I prepared the subtitles, and then Mani Ratnam sir, he sat with me and he checked everything, and he was happy, and we finished part 1. Ponniyin PS1 in 7 hours with him checking. And before that, the whole process took 1 week. So, I've done a lot of films. And now, recently, I'll give you an example of something which I was very happy with, because it was so spontaneous in my mind. There was Tiger 3, and there's a shot in which Salman looks at an agent who, in the beginning of the film, he's lying on the ground and he's wounded and whatever, and he's an agent known to Tiger, and he looks at this guy and he says, "Bahut arson ke baad mile hain." Now, we could have said, what do you think you would have said?
It's been a while, or something like that. Like, it wouldn't be bahut arson ke baad. I wouldn't use each of those words and translate them.
Yes, but I put long time no see.
Long time no see. That sounds perfect.
That sounds like dialogue.
Yeah, it does sound like dialogue, actually.
And it's a bit of Ani type of dialogue, which suits Tiger.
Which is perfect.
Now, yes, you can't put long time no see if it's Chaudhary Ka Chand. So you have to do it in relation to the period, the setting. Now, sometimes I remember somebody there's a woman in a village and she's getting hassled, and they put as a subtitle, "Pull up your socks." Now, that's too British. Seriously. First of all, there are no socks under the sari. And then it's too British. So you can't make it too American. And I saw in Chaudhary Ka Chand, somebody had Johnny Walker was calling Rahman, and they said, "Hi, dude." Now, how can you do that?
So hi, dude, for what? Are yaar. What's the Hindi?
Are yaar. Yeah, are yaar.
Oh boy, I'm literally holding my head.
That's Mangal is the same family.
Mangal was outrageous. It was just
outrageous. And there was another word I found, and it was that he couldn't make up their mind. They said, "Why are you hiccoughing?" So they didn't get the hiccuping or hiccups or coughing. But that's an inventive word, I thought. That belongs in Asterix.
Will this become easier with AI? That is, you get one set of computer-generated subtitles and then you can tweak them and make them work. And I mean, with machine learning, it is actually getting better. But of course, it's never going to bring what you bring. But do you think that'll actually shorten the process for someone like you?
I don't think AI is going to work for subtitles. I don't think so, because every line is different, every situation is different. I'd like to see them have a subtitle and spell a Tamil name correctly. I mean, how are they going to do this? How are they going to do it?
I don't think it can be you standalone, but can it aid a subtitler like you? Not really. You don't.
Not at all. It's like people who say, we'll buy a Mac and then write a novel. I mean,
how many times do you watch a film before subtitling it? Are you brought in at a rough cut stage? Do you only watch the final cut? How does it work?
Because I've done so many films, I watch twice, max. Okay. Sometimes once.
You're fast.
Because that's true.
That's amazing. Are songs easier or harder than dialogue?
I find the 50 songs easier than today's songs, because today's songs don't say much. And they're kind of rubbish and they just are quite empty. And so what I don't like is rhyming and forcing meaning. I've been watching some clips on YouTube and they try to rhyme. It's ridiculous. The subtitle is not a song to be sung and recorded by Taylor Swift. It is a subtitle. And then to rhyme it, mine and thine and whatever, and time. I mean, it's crazy. If you can do something clever, do it. When it's an idiom and they're doing something, find an equivalent idiom. Or if they're rhyming something, try that. Not forcing meaning. Change the meaning.
I want to ask you about some of the subjects that you worked on in detail, these books, a couple of documentaries, and what are your favorite works? I know you said they have to have a minimum of 5 classics and so on. I wouldn't say just name one film or one song, but, sort of list a couple of your favorites so that we get a peek into that. So we can start with film. Let's start with film. So let's say Guru Dutt, right? What is your
Guru Dutt,
top
I'd
film?
say really people will be surprised, but Mr. and Mrs. 55.
Same. For me,
it's so beautiful.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, it's a bit anti-women, and that whole Lalita Power thing was a bit dated, but of its time and the lightness of touch.
Yeah.
And
it's hilarious.
Hilarious. Brilliant dialogue. Brilliant dialogue.
Yeah, Madhubala is just, I know all of Guru Dutt's heroines are gorgeous, but there's something about the two of them together.
Two of them, yes.
It's magic.
Magic, and she has such great comic timing. We didn't think that of her.
Yeah. No, I'm so thrilled you said this. It's my favorite Guru Dutt film, and everyone just thinks not Pyasa, really. So this is
Pyasa is very beautiful, but Mr. and Mrs. 55 shows a different kind of skill.
And I think it's more watchable. I can go back and keep living and watching that again.
Johnny
and again.
Walker is
amazing. Yeah, he's amazing in all of Guru Dutt's films, but this is particularly great. Yeah, and the
scenes between him.
Yeah, and the scene you picked for the documentary is also really lovely.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
The couple of scenes, right? When he says, "Aap communist hai, nahi, main cartoonist hu." So you picked a couple of those very clever. It's just such a wonderful film.
Yes. And Raj Kapoor, I'd say Shri 420. Mehboob Saab, I'd say Andaz. And Bimal Roy, I'd say Tu Bhiga Zameen. Oh, it's a beautiful film.
Yeah, but I can't watch it again and again. I feel like Ek Baar Dekh Liya is sort of
it's
enough.
Very sad.
I can watch Kagaz Ke Phool again and again. It's somehow very sad, but I'm able to do it again and relive it. But Do Bhiga Zameen, I think I'm one and done on that one.
I must tell you something. I'm not keen on Kagaz Ke Phool.
You're not, nor is Wahida Rahman, but why aren't you keen on it?
I think it didn't work. It didn't work. It's too fragmented, and I think Johnny Walker's section, which works out to be 30 to 40 minutes,
I think it can go.
It's a huge stone in the middle of the film, and it is really foolish, and it's a confused mind. As Kafi Saab said, वो बहुत confused थे, But I thought that was a weak film. It was saved by the photography, and that's about it.
But
the songs.
But also that emotion of everything is transitory and you can't quite trust anything, fame, love, relationship. Somehow that seems to be the sustaining factor in that film. That somehow seems to hold me, as an audience.
But I think the Johnny Walker bit just killed
Yeah,
that.
I forward that.
You
I
know,
quickly move on.
Really, you have to see the whole of the film, the whole story. That was a problem. But 3 for 420 is amazing film. Again, amazing dialogue, amazing what he's doing in that film. And the song, everything is lovely. And newer films, I say Garam Hawa in the 70s, unbelievable film. Beautiful.
What about your favorite Wahida Rehman films? For me, it's Guide, probably.
Yeah,
is
Guide is
the
very
absolute
good.
best. But what
But
else?
hers, I like Tisri Kasam.
You like the Sri Kasam.
Yes, something different. It was different. Of course, Guide is beautiful, and she's wonderful. But Tisri Kasam, just there was something about it that was very different. You don't imagine her in that role.
I also really like Mujhe Jeene Do. I like
Yes,
her a lot.
yes.
I love the music. I mean, yeah, it's actually got a couple of my favorite Lata songs, in that movie. She has a lullaby in there. She has that Tere Bachpan song, and she has Raat Bhi Hai Kuch Hai Bhigi Bhigi.
Yeah, that's
It's
beautiful song. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, my favorite of the Wahida Lata combination happened to both be Jayadev songs. It's just, Reshma or Shera. I love Tu Channa Main Chandni.
Yes.
What are your
I
favorite
see. Songs?
Lata
Where is
Mangeshkar songs?
Lata
I'll give you
Mangeshkar?
5, chalo.
Oh,
We
my
can't
God.
force one.
Okay, Chandi Raate Pyar Ki Baatein from
Yeah.
Jal.
Yeah.
Then I like Aapki Nazron Ne Samjha. Beautiful. She's really talking to you in that. Then I like Ajeeb Dastan Hai Ye. Kahan Shuru Kahan Khatam. That's a fantastic song. Then I like, let me think of something. Raj Kapoor, there was a song in Shri 420. I forget the name, but it is when he comes back from the casino and she calls out to him. I forget the name, I'm sorry. And let's think of a last one. I think it has, the instant you realize it's Lata ji, is that Didi Tera Devar Divana. The minute you hear that, you hear her, and that I like that surprise element in her voice. But she's so skilled. And of course, Aayega Aane Wala. Beautiful. It's a beautiful song.
That was also there in your documentary.
Yes.
Movie
yes.
Mahal, right?
Yes, right. It was there.
You
And then I have the documentary about her.
About her too, yeah.
Yes, that is also very beautiful. And the picturization is stunning. With Joseph Pershing, the cameraman, very good. And Pakiza songs. So Lataji is very difficult. It depends on your mood and everything. But Aapki Nazron Ne Samjha is a very haunting thing. It's a very haunting melody. Everybody likes Lag Ja Gale, but I prefer Aapki Nazron.
What about your favorite Javed Akhtar song or script? I can give you one of each, maybe.
Yes. I think let's go. I would say the song would be Kal Ho Na Ho. And then as far as the film, Diwar, definitely. Diwar is a beautiful script, beautiful dialogue, beautiful intensity. And Mr. Bachchan and Shashi Kapoor and Nirupal Roy, these three really were really brilliant in it, really very good. So I think that's really, and I don't know, Rehman, I think Bombay, all the Mani Ratnam.
All the Mani Ratnam albums, actually they're fantastic.
All of them. Exceptional. They're very exceptional.
Any non-Mani Ratnam album that really stands out for you?
I think
For me, it would
Rangila was very good.
Rangila was fantastic. Another for me is 1947 Earth. I love
Yes.
every song, in that.
Yes. But there is some magical combination of Mani Ratnam and AR.
There is. And Gulzar.
There is. And Gulzar. Really, there is a combination that works very well. I think also Rahman, because of their history, he wants to please Mani Ratnam. And when you want to please and to impress someone, and Mani Ratnam is someone you want him to be impressed. I'm telling you, when he walks in the room, everybody stands up. And sometimes he looks at me and says, "Why are you standing up?" But you just feel like you want to stand up because he has that amazing personality. He's one of the most enlightening persons to work with. And I really think something is that two people I find to be very exceptional directors. One is Mani Ratnam, and I think Zoya Akhtar. Zoya has some real sense of cinema. The others are very good, but there's something special about these two. And Sanjay Leela Bhansali, you could say he has a definite approach, and Karan Johar is definite approach. They are like schools of filmmaking, like Raj Kapoor or Guru Dutt. You could say these four are schools of filmmaking.
Yeah, you can watch something by them and tell that this is a signature move, but each of the movies is quite different.
Yes, you can tell.
Gulzar. Favorite film, favorite as a director, favorite song?
Our favorite film of Gulzar Saab, I would say, I don't know. I like Marches. And the song I really thought was beautiful, to say Naraz Nahi Zindagi. It's a beautiful melody, beautiful words. There are many songs of his,
Is more se jate hain,
yes, that one is also beautiful. All of them are really very beautiful. And it's interesting how different they are. Each song is very different. In each era, he changed. Like Majru Saab. Majru Saab was very, very modern. He could do for Sehgal. He wrote songs for Sehgal, and then he wrote for Papa Kehte Hain Bada Naam Kare. So he had that range. But all of them really were at the service of films. Any interview you do, you say, well, it depended on the film and the film script. And all of them would say that.
With Zakir Hussain, I don't want you to name a film album. He's done so few, though they've been exceptional. Like Mr. and Mrs. Iyer is fantastic. I like the little bits he did for Saaz, But do you have a favorite album or a favorite collaboration of his, a favorite concert?
I must tell you that it's Shakti.
Shakti, right?
Oh, a handful of beauty. I remember going to the concert in Paris, and you really felt you were on a runway and you were going to take off. It was an amazing album.
What year was this? What year did you hear them in Paris?
Somewhere in the 70s.
So this you heard when El Shankar was still there in Shakti?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never heard Shakti with El Shankar, which to me is
Tiku,
one of the... Of course, Viku Vinayakram.
Viku, yes. He was there. And so it was the real thing.
Yeah, it was the original group, yeah. I recently heard them on their 50th anniversary tour. They were very kind. I met Zakir Hussain backstage. But for me, I've met Zakir Hussain more than once. I mean, it's usually backstage and, in one of these concert situations. But John McLaughlin, it's just something else to finally see him in person and have a chat with him. And I'll tell you that story. He was really lovely. I know that you like Haruki Murakami. Have you read Absolutely on Music, Conversations with Ozawa? Have you read this book of his?
No,
I think you will really enjoy it.
Really? Oh, I should. You must send me the reference.
I think you'll really enjoy the book.
Okay.
It's literally the two of them having a conversation.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So now, how long have you been in America and what connected you to Indian cinema?
Oh, I grew up in India.
Okay.
I grew up in Delhi. For me, the connection with cinema is more through music. Most of the songs that I'm talking about, I don't even know if I've seen the movies or if I've seen the movie, it's, a long time ago, some Doordarshan, broadcast that was going on. But the songs are just truly exceptional. So I grew up in India. I've been in the US about 15, 17 years. I came here for graduate school to study economics. But yeah, I still watch all Hindi movies. I read about them. I love watching all cinema, but Hindi cinema is it's like being at home. And the songs, we're the only ones who make musicals and where the music has the standalone quality where it doesn't have to be watched with the film. And I don't think most musicals in the West have that quality.
I would say it's language. To be fair, I think Singing in the Rain is one masterpiece.
Oh, yeah, it is a masterpiece. But, you can literally handpick. There are these, a few movies where all the songs work, like Sound of Music. All the songs are fantastic.
Yes.
Singing in the Rain, all the songs are lovely. But in Indian movies, especially Hindi movies, because that's most familiar to me, but also, all the other regions, I love the musical album of a movie when I have not watched the film, have no intention of watching. The film is terrible, I will still love. Like recently, recently Rakesh Omprakash Mehra made Mirzaya. I haven't seen the film. I have no interest in that, watching it. But that album is exceptional. It's Shankar Ehsaan Loy with Gulzar. It's got Kaushiki Chakrabarti, who is
I must listen to
Ajay
him.
Chakrabarti's daughter. Some really fantastic music in that. So I can't think of too many examples like this of Western musicals where I don't care about the musical. I haven't watched the film, but the songs just sort of, turn into something else. So unless it's a jazz standard or like John Coltrane has played my favorite thing, something like that, I wouldn't have that. So language is one, but I think there's something about Indian movie music which lives beyond the film.
I would say, to be very fair to Hollywood, that all Indian films are musical. So it was an industry that was massive. Whereas musical in America and Hollywood was just one genre. You cannot compare the two because everything is dependent on the music. And today, because it's not, there is a problem.
Yeah. And even our thrillers are musicals. Like Wo Kaun Thi is a musical. Uday and I were talking about this. Gangster movies are musicals. Teesri Kasam. Jewel Thief is a musical. I mean, what a musical that is.
Yeah, what a musical. But because the whole thing was musical, which was the thing that actually disturbed the Western viewer. They found it, my God, you've got a serious subject or too much. And it added length to the film. The biggest problem was this 2.5-hour films, so that was a big disadvantage for Hindi cinema. I would say if you don't really know, in Hindi or Urdu, Hindustani, I don't think the songs can move you.
Yeah, they can't. It's
really
very
connected
difficult
to that language. And because a Western audience don't necessarily and don't need to speak Hindi or Urdu, they cannot relate to that. And so it seemed like a really imposition and subtitles cannot convey emotions in that way. I can't imagine a Hindi subtitle for Singing in the Rain.
Oh, yeah, that would be difficult. Some of these Marvel movies are dubbed in Bhojpuri and things like that. And they're kind of hilarious. I haven't watched the Bhojpuri version of the Marvel movies, but I've seen clips on Instagram and things. I have 2 more questions. One is, if someone asked you that, one would like to do a conversation series with Nasreen, Munni, Kabir, who would be the best person to interview you the way you would like to be interviewed?
To be honest, I wouldn't like it.
Why?
I believe that because I think that you do more effective work if you never get bigger than your subjects. That's my reading. And to start thinking of myself as a separate person who has all of this, no, I wouldn't be comfortable. Maybe one day, but right now, no. People have suggested.
But you are a separate person who has this fantastic repository of knowledge, a fantastic body of work.
But I think my forte was somebody said something wonderful. It was Madhu Jain of India Today. And when she reviewed the Guru Dutt film documentary, she said, the most wonderful thing about this film is the director, meaning me, is invisible. And I loved that idea. You have to open the door, not to yourself. You have to open the door to a subject. And I don't like that door opening onto me. I much prefer to say Lata Mangeshkar or Rahman or something. For the moment, it's not false humility. It is actually a certain amount of, I think you get much more done if you just concentrate on the outside.
Which makes you a lot like your subjects. I don't know if you realize that. And the last question, what are you working on right now?
To be honest, I'm stuck. So I've been doing some subtitles of Sri Ram Raghavan. Do you know his work?
Yes, I love his work, yeah.
Love his work. So he's got a new film that's going to be released.
Merry Christmas, right?
That's
the one coming out. I read about it in the papers.
Yes, so I'm working on that. I'm very excited about that. So basically it's subtitling. I have not any idea about a book because all the people I work with, I think I'm better on the old timers, frankly, because I know they work better and there's nobody left. So I'm a little bit at the moment thinking, and unless you get, how it is, you have to live with the book for 2 years or 3 years. And if you're not obsessed, it's a problem. I don't know if you ever saw, but I did 2 diaries. One was about the 100 years of Indian cinema and one was about Sahir. So I want to do a diary next year because it'll be 100 years of Raj Kapoor.
Oh, lovely. I would love to read that. I haven't read the Sahir one. I've read the 100 Years of Cinema. The Sahir one, I haven't even seen that floating around. I should try and find a copy.
Definitely.
I love Sahir.
Yes. You'll be amazed. We found some amazing pictures of him and his mother and really amazing pictures. And I got 35 people to comment on their favorite Sahir song and about a story behind it.
Oh, lovely.
Yes, I should try and find a way of sending you the diary.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is
you're
just
most
such a
welcome.
pleasure. And
I really enjoyed talking to you. Really.
Thank you. I'm glad that was worth your while.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shruti. Thank you.
Ideas of India is produced by the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Help us grow by giving us a rating and leaving a review. Follow us on Twitter at @SRajagopalan and at Ideas of India. Also check out our initiative commemorating 30 years of India's market reforms at the 1991project.com.